Hi, my name is Laura Solomon, and today I'm here to talk to you about social media trends and challenges. And right now is a very interesting time to be talking about these topics. Today I'm going to be covering four broad areas. First, we're going to talk about the rule of the algorithm. And this has really come into play more and more as we have been looking at trends in social media. And of course, we can't ignore Twitter, now X, and what's been happening in that realm. It has been chaotic, to say the least. We're going to move on then to the demographic that many libraries are interested in reaching, because this is especially that teen generation. And we'll talk about what they are doing or not doing in the social space. And lastly, we're going to discuss social media. Is this still where libraries even want to be? And that's going to be very interesting, I think. So before we dive into any of this, I want to say this. I have done variations of this presentation over several years. In the past, it's been more about what kinds of content work best for libraries, and I wish that I could say this was more of the same. But the truth is, we're not in an environment anymore that solidly supports that kind of thinking. We're watching traditional social media collapse in many ways in real time. And so what I'm doing today is delving a little deeper into what that environment looks like now and issues that libraries have to contend with going forward. In addition, I will possibly be introducing you to some new social networks that you may not already be aware of. Do not immediately plan to start using these for your library. In almost all cases, these can be very specialized and not good fits for organizations in general. As you'll see as we go through all of this today, traditional social media is sinking, and jumping to smaller lifeboats isn't necessarily a way to survive this tsunami of what's happening right now. So let's start with the rise of the algorithm. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of the algorithms, but may not have perhaps understood how deep this rabbit hole goes. So let's start with what is an algorithm really? It's a compilation of rules and data that make decisions about what users want to see on a particular platform. And so social media sites create unique algorithms for every person who uses the site, which means no two people have the exact same experience on that site. Essentially, social media algorithms analyze user behavior and prioritize content the platform believes the user wants to see and is most likely to engage with. But how these use data is to create a person's feed is different from platform to platform, and they're changing constantly. So what worked for you last year may not work for you this year. In some sense, yes, algorithms are intended to filter through all of your potential content and give you a quote-unquote better experience. And I think most of us would argue that it isn't really better. But allegedly giving users a better experience is only what you see on the surface. The reason that these services do this has a lot more to do with money, which of course should surprise absolutely no one. Algorithms attempt to keep you scrolling for longer. The longer you stay on a platform, the more ads you're likely to see. And if you think you've been seeing more ads in your feeds lately, you're not wrong. Make no mistake, social media's glory days as online community are mostly gone. I've been talking about how Facebook became pay to play for more than a decade, and it's only gotten worse. Organic engagement on almost any social platform is extremely difficult and really rare to achieve. By now, you know that the people who actually follow your library almost never see your content unless you're paying to promote it. Libraries generally don't have big bucks for ad spends and post boosting. We keep posting anyway. This environment has been a red flag for library marketing for a long time, but we keep posting because it doesn't seem like there are a lot of options, and it's still an expectation, and we'll dive more into that later. So what does the algorithm mean for us as libraries? Well, I think it means a couple things. First, It means this: short form video dominance. Short form video is really the star of social media these days. And of course, TikTok is leading the charge, and other platforms are vying for a piece of that action. It's no accident that you've seen short form video prioritized on virtually every one of the major platforms outside of TikTok, because they all want to prioritize that kind of content just like TikTok does. They all want to be TikTok, in short. So now you're seeing things like short form video, and of course reels on Facebook. Instagram has short form videos. I think there's stories. I lose track of the names. There's shorts on YouTube. You get the idea. But the thing about TikTok, or even short form video, is that it isn't for the faint of heart. And not to mention that TikTok in particular isn't even an option for some organizations. For example, I work for a state agency. We're not even allowed to have TikTok on state devices. We're not allowed to do anything with TikTok. So it's not even a choice that we can make. The other part of TikTok, aside from being focused entirely on social media short form video, is that Gen Z is turning specifically to TikTok for search. Now, that doesn't mean they have stopped going to YouTube for search, because some of you probably already know that Google is not always the first choice for Gen Z. For some time, it's actually been YouTube. But again, they're moving from that longer form video to shorter form video. So now TikTok, in many ways, is becoming their default search engine. So one of the most important things that marketers do now is they optimize their content specifically for TikTok. And for those of you who watch TikTok, I know I spend too much time watching TikTok outside of work, of course. You're familiar with this idea that everything on TikTok is very heavily geared to the algorithm. And so that's essentially search engine optimization, but it's not happening for Google, or it's not really happening for YouTube. They want to improve their content for TikTok search result pages, because that means they get more visibility. And in most cases, that means more money, not just more engagement. TikTok is really geared, especially for professional content creators or organizations or people that want to be professional content creators. The other piece of this, in terms of what libraries have to be considering, is exactly this, is that brands, organizations, people are becoming serious creators, because algorithms prioritize engagement. And so adopting to that, having more creative, more engaging content is really, really important. And the problem for many libraries, if not most libraries, is that they don't have a dedicated person. Very, very few have a dedicated team. I don't know of many libraries that can point to a person on their staff and say, the only thing this person does is create social media content, especially short form video. Major or large metro libraries, for example, in the public library realm, probably universities too have people who can do that because they can rely on students. But for many libraries, this isn't something that we can sustain. And social media is most often, I think, an afterthought, or it's an add-on to the job duties of someone else who wears multiple hats. And there's no easy fix for this. I don't want you to think that there is. It's making it extremely difficult for libraries to compete for engagement on these platforms. There's a lot going on with Twitter right now. And of course, one of the most recent developments is that it isn't even called Twitter. It's now called X. There's been a lot happening since Elon Musk bought and took over Twitter last year. So let's talk about some of that and what that means. So yes, the party is over. Twitter is certainly not what it was, and I think it's going to be a long time before I can call Twitter X, and I find that I'm not alone in that. But Musk, for example, upended traditional Twitter verification. He turned it into a pay-for-play system where you could pay $8 a month and you would suddenly have that blue check by your name. So that blue check doesn't mean that that account is authoritative anymore. It just simply means someone paid for it. And what this has led to is people impersonating government accounts, the spread of fake images, all of this kind of thing. And for people or organizations who opt not to pay that monthly subscription fee for the blue check, that also means that there's a loss of credibility. So those blue check marks are no longer authoritative. And so the platform also, by the way, and you've probably noticed this, has been plagued by all kinds of technical glitches. And this, of course, has frustrated a lot of users. For those of you who are TweetDeck users, you know that TweetDeck has essentially disappeared, which was tremendously annoying and frustrating for myself. I was a heavy TweetDeck user. People have also reported that the For You timeline is showing them content that they're not interested in. So even the algorithm isn't working properly. And this is probably just a small part of all of the changes and outright chaos that has occurred since Musk bought the platform just last year. So what this means is people are leaving. Anecdotally, I can tell you that very, very large numbers of the people that I have followed over the years have either deactivated or deleted their accounts or just stopped posting entirely. I myself mostly fall into this last group. I check in about once a week just to make sure I'm not getting messages or some kind of notification, but that's it. I am not really actively posting, and I haven't for a while now. And as a result of these issues and all of the things that are happening with Twitter/X, some are leaving Twitter altogether. More than 32 million users are projected to exit this platform in the 2 years since Musk took over. That's according to a 2022 report from last December from the market research agency Insider Intelligence. Now, to give you an idea of what that scale is, Twitter reported having 238 million monetizable daily active users last year before Musk acquired Twitter/X. So you can see that we're already planning, or at least Twitter is planning, to lose a great number of users, which perhaps is contributing to this flailing that seems to be happening there in terms of trying to find something that works and to prevent that. But one of the things I think that gets overlooked in this essentially collapse of Twitter is this, and that's because Twitter was a major place for people to come together in community, and that is now gone. And it has affected a very large number, if not all, of the social movements, organizations using Twitter to get their message out. So, for example, imagine the Arab Spring of 2011. The Me Too movement, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, even the Save Ohio Libraries campaign back in 2009. All of them either have used Twitter as their central gathering point, or it was a central part of their strategy. And without Twitter, these social movements would not have gained nearly as much traction as they did. Twitter provided a place to amplify those voices that previously have gone unheard. So what that has meant is that we've started to see all kinds of people jump to other platforms in the hope that they would find a replacement for Twitter. One of those early on was Mastodon. The thing about Mastodon, though, there's some, we could discuss this probably for at least a little while, but there's privacy and security issues that are concerning for activists, because Mastodon allows users to join different servers run by different groups and different people. And so the privacy and the security and the content moderation is only as good as whoever is running a Mastodon server, because Mastodon like many of these other Twitter-like platforms, is decentralized, meaning there isn't one place to go. There's lots of smaller places to go, and those smaller places are all individual servers run by individuals. At least Twitter, before Musk took over, had dedicated privacy and security teams and offered more transparency about how the system worked. And so some activists are using popular social networks like Instagram, like TikTok, but the visual nature of those platforms, when you compare it against this text-based medium that Twitter has traditionally been, changes how people are able to interact with each other. But since Elon Musk acquired Twitter last year, and we've seen this ongoing chaos, some digital media experts have been bracing for all of the impact that is happening, the mass layoffs, the mass exodus, and how that's going to affect social media or social movements going forward, because there's now issues in how people see Twitter as a source of information and a source of community. It's not seen the same way anymore. And so we're seeing that the town square, the centralized place where people could go to talk to each other, to put out their message, is gone. It is not what it was. And this is why you're seeing people jump ship and go to places like Mastodon, going to places like Blue Sky and Threads, and we'll talk about Threads. But there's no good replacement for Twitter. They're all jumping other places, or many of them are anyway, and they're finding that these other places aren't Twitter. There are alternatives like Mastodon, Blue Sky, which was founded by Jack Dorsey, who actually founded Twitter. So there was a lot of hope there. But these don't appear to be filling the same purpose that Twitter did for so long. Again, because, for example, Mastodon and Blue Sky are very decentralized. There isn't one central place. We're talking about individuals running individual places. And that makes it a lot harder to build that community, to get that message out. And their numbers are growing. I don't want you to think that these have completely stalled, but the rate at which they're growing has decreased significantly. And Threads, by the way, is not immune to that. We'll talk about that in just a second. And so there isn't a good replacement for Twitter. There is no new central town square. People rushed by the millions just a few weeks ago to sign up for Threads. This is from Meta, formerly Facebook, when it appeared earlier this summer. And it seemed like it was that lifeboat, if you'll pardon the mixed analogy, for the dumpster fire that Twitter/X has essentially become. But it was immediately problematic because it requires an Instagram account in order to sign up for it. So if you didn't have an Instagram account, you immediately had to go get an Instagram account in addition to a Threads account. And for my own agency, this was an issue because we didn't have an Instagram account. And that was a very purposeful decision on our part, because what we do as an agency honestly has very little visual appeal. We don't have a lot of visual content. We didn't feel that we could maintain an Instagram account effectively. It wasn't the right fit for us. But now we're forced to do something with it because it looks rather odd to have an Instagram account or to have a Threads account and then have an inactive Instagram account. It just seems weird, at least to me. So now we are forced to maintain an Instagram account and the Threads account, which we, of course, immediately jumped on, hoping that it would be the thing, the new Twitter place to be. But all of these don't really solve the core problem, which is they're still all not Twitter. None of these are truly centralized because even Threads, which is more centralized, it forces you to be tied to another platform. It's just not the same. Twitter was one town square for one town. Now, Threads perhaps is a bigger town square than the others that are vying for this Twitter space, but the audience is still divided. Not everybody is there. And that's not to say everyone in the world on Twitter was there, but everybody knew what it did and what it was for. And so the audience is still very divided, and that presents a problem that isn't manageable for most. And so we're seeing things like this article. The best Twitter alternative is logging off. And this quote from that Mashable article, Twitter is a shell of itself. It's essentially a remain from a different period of online, and its replacements are partial recreations. I think that's important to understand here, that Twitter replacements, as I've already talked about, they aren't Twitter, and that's not going to change. But the most important part of this is this last line of this quote: you do not need any of these sites. This is a hard concept, I think, for libraries to grab onto, because we have been tweeting for so long. It has been part of our social media strategy, and we've had Twitter yanked out from underneath us. But as disconcerting as that is, I think this is an important idea to consider, that we don't need Twitter or replacements, alleged replacements for Twitter. So where does that leave us as libraries? Unfortunately, not anywhere really specific. Mastodon had the advantage of being first. They were the first ones out there with something that seemed like it could be a Twitter replacement, but it's got serious friction for the average user to onboard. So what I mean by that is that it's actually fairly difficult to sign up and figure out what you're supposed to do at that point, because there are so many servers growing all the time. Where do you go? In some ways, it reminds me of Reddit, except Reddit is at least centralized, and you can be on multiple places very easily. It's very easy to understand where you are and the scope of that platform. It's not as easy on Mastodon. You have to pick a server or more than one server, and you have to log in individually to that server. Blue Sky is still pretty niche as far as that goes right now. It's also, I think, still invite only, so not everybody can even try it out. Threads is the closest thing to a centralized place. But even though tons of people rush to sign up, again, thinking, hey, ta-da, we finally have the new Twitter, engagement on Threads has fallen off tremendously since that initial period of signups. The big advantage that Threads has, aside from being the closest to a centralized and mainstream location, is that there's more control over problematic content than others right now. There is content moderation. There is essentially somebody in charge. But to be honest, I think that libraries need to focus on getting their message out in other ways that are not Twitter or Twitter-like. In this next section, let's discuss Gen Z, the younger demographic that libraries are often trying to reach, the teens and the young adults. And let's take a look at this space and how specifically Gen Z is viewing the social media space. So libraries, we've heard for a long time that we have to use social media to make a genuine connection. And in order to do that, we needed to provide authentic content. We had to have a voice. But even with those things, we're suddenly finding that Gen Z isn't responding. Social media is being redefined. One thing to understand is that no matter how authentic your content is in these legacy platforms, chances are good that Gen Z isn't even there to hear your message. And that is because young people, they're becoming disillusioned with the whole legacy experience of social media. And it's funny to think that social media is less than 2 decades old, and it's already considered legacy. They look, for example, at Instagram's pretty jumbled content feed, which has tons of ads and lots of suggestions for things they should look at or follow, and they're not seeing a whole lot of content they actually want to see, the people that they're following. And for many of us, that's not new. Perhaps we've just gotten used to it, but they're looking at it and going, nah, we don't want that. Even with Twitter, before Elon Musk bought it, they were looking at Twitter and saying, this is a bunch of old people, especially old people who are arguing and who are very divisive. And Gen Z really isn't about that. So they weren't particularly interested in Twitter. And then across all platforms, regardless, you're seeing constant changing of features as all of the platforms are scrambling to try to figure out what works for these younger folks. And lastly, none of them really prioritize the user experience. So if you're using social media, you are not getting what you want out of it, probably. And Gen Z, perhaps out of all the generations to date, has really taken a look at that and understood that and is not willing to put up with it. A lot of experts believe that the original purpose of social media platforms, which is to stay connected with friends online, has been lost entirely. And Gen Z is really leading this change. Social media usage fell in 2021 across every major app outside of TikTok, which probably doesn't surprise anyone. Only 28% of U.S. teens now use Facebook as a primary platform, and honestly, I'm surprised it's even that high. We've known for a while that teens, young adults, have not been on Facebook, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we were to drill down further into that stat that a lot of that 28% are young adults, college age and even slightly older, who perhaps were on Facebook in the earlier days and just haven't left. This new generation of users, they're voting with their feet. In other words, they're leaving. And this is changing the social media landscape because we're seeing a new type of platform that's starting to gain traction. And honestly, when I say start, it's been there. It's actually been there for several years, but it's been flying under the radar so closely that people haven't really noticed it in a significant way. And the reason for this is because Gen Z wants more authentic and meaningful online interactions with the people that they are choosing to stay close to. And this is why we're seeing this rise in messaging and voice app Discord and other platforms or apps like it. Discord now has more than 140 million users. And for those of you who don't use Discord, you probably have heard of it, but didn't realize how huge it is, especially with Gen Z. And it's not just about gaming. My son, by the way, he just went off to college, uses Discord primarily for gaming, but not entirely for gaming. And then we're seeing other kind of interesting platforms like Be Real, which is kind of taken off in the last year or two. It's not probably huge enough for you have to been to either be aware of it or be interested in it. But we're seeing this new breed of social media platform that caters to this desire to be authentic. And then we have this Be Real. And what this does is every day the app encourages users to quote unquote be real by taking a quick picture of whatever they're doing at random moments. So you're more likely to get mundane, everyday candids, truly candids. And it uses both the front and the back camera, so you get a more candid, genuine snapshot of everyday life. And the hook is, though, get this, is that you can't view your friends' posts unless you post yourself. So that means that usage in terms of the environment is much more authentic because you want to see your friends' stuff, but in order for you to see that, you also have to post your own. It doesn't really have likes, followers, ads, again, all going back to this, I think this is a great name for the app, Be Real. It's already winning over Gen Z. It's got more than, at this point, it's probably more than 3 million users, and it's been downloaded more than 20 million times. So gaining some traction, not huge in the case of something like, for example, Twitter, Facebook. It also hasn't been around nearly as long. So it's going to be interesting to see how this takes off. Something else I thought was kind of funny is there's now almost a parody app called Be Fake, which is starting to get some awareness. But Be Real is not a place that libraries are really going to show up at, I think. This might actually be easier than some of the other platforms I'm going to talk about in just a minute, but it's going to be very hard to connect in this kind of environment because it's mostly individuals to individuals. What we're seeing now And we've actually been seeing for the last several years, it's just not perhaps gained as much significance, as we're seeing the rise of something that many experts refer to as digital campfires. Being yourself is very compelling. This is why Gen Z is sort of putting their hand up as far as legacy social media, traditional social media. They want to make real friends. They don't just want acquaintances. They don't want just Facebook friends. They want connections that are more closely resembling real life connections. Even, for example, Fortnite and Roblox are digital campfires, because what that means is that they're small groups of people gathering because they have similar interests. So this is people that teens, young adults want to connect with, not just because they happen to exist on a platform. Another name for this is micro-community campfires. Again, small niche communities that revolve around shared interests. Even TikTok, by the way, comes under this heading because it houses so many of these. If you've ever heard of Book Talk, BOOKTOC, like TikTok because it's on TikTok, or the expression, I'm on the wrong side of TikTok, or how did I end up on the blank side of TikTok, fill in the blank there. It's because there are literally thousands, if not millions, of sides and places and communities and digital campfires that you can be in on TikTok. But this also includes messaging apps, and perhaps most importantly and especially messaging apps like Snapchat, WhatsApp, Discord, even a newer platform called Geneva, which bills itself, I love this tagline, the online place to find your offline people. It's a group chat app, which is a little easier to use, by the way, than Discord. If you're interested in just trying it out, message me directly. I'll send you an invite. Just let me know that you were viewing this webinar. But in many cases, algorithms direct you to specific micro communities based on your preference. Certainly, we're seeing that on TikTok. Again, the whole idea is that they're getting something that is perhaps more private. All of these other kinds of, I keep using the word legacy, but traditional social media, it's harder to be yourself. You have to have you don't have to, but most choose to have some kind of curated identity, and that can be exhausting. Gen Z wants to make connections that are closer to real life connections, or operate in much the same way as real life connections, away from the crowds. And there's a lot of expectations that go with social interaction online. One marketer compared it to a digital airport, and nobody wants to hang out there. Gen Z does not want to be in the digital airport, and these days, I'm not sure I blame them. I don't want to be in the digital airport either, even though it's my job. It's just, it's getting harder and harder. There is at least an illusion of more privacy, and perhaps in many cases more privacy in these places, in these digital campfires. Certainly, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Discord, you're only hanging out there with the people you want to hang out with. And so there's a barrier to entry. It's not just, hey, everybody come and talk. It's like, no, you can only come be with us if I say it's okay, which fits right in with teen behavior probably across the ages, but especially now where Gen Z wants to be themselves and they don't necessarily want this curated image, which is a lot of work. It's very appealing. So you're seeing a lot of traction for this digital campfire idea. Fortnite and Roblox are already mentioned. Even though they're games, you hang out with the people you want to hang out with there. TikTok comes under this as well. One writer writing for businessesgrow.com said, abandonment might be a strong word, but it is a very strong trend, and we have to do more than just pay attention at this point. So the word digital camp, or the phrase digital campfire, has actually been around for several years, even if you've never heard it. It's a trend that's been ongoing, and I've actually talked about it in the past. And there's lots of things that come with this as far as what do libraries do, right? Because young people are basically taking their stuff, they're taking their toys, and they're not going home, but they're going to other people's houses, and they're barricading themselves in there. They're again saying, hey, only you can come because I said you could. You can come because we like you. And so we as libraries may not be able to go those places. It's almost impossible for brands and organizations to show up in an authentic way to these kinds of platforms or to these groups. If you've ever seen that meme, with the old guy with the skateboard and his hat on backwards, like, hey, fellow kids, here I am. That's what we're looking at, is a scenario where we are the old person trying to disguise ourselves and show up in these Gen Z only spaces. It's very hard for us, if not impossible, to truly be authentic, and for them to even let us in is perhaps the biggest barrier. So connecting in these spaces, even if it's possible, is going to require a level of social media content creation that we haven't seen before in most libraries. Talking about content creation, social media, and especially digital campfires right now, is really all about shared experience. Gaming has been shared experience online since practically the beginning of online gaming. And gaming has changed the culture and is continuing to change the culture. It's really leading the way in terms of identity, how you show up on the internet. Even content creation on TikTok is kind of a game because you have to beat the algorithm to get your content seen. So gaming, putting that in quotes, is no longer really a category. Gaming is now a mindset, not just a social niche. Interacting helps create your identity. And your listening to this webinar is part of our shared experience. So what we're seeing is almost a reverse engineering. I'm going to use that phrase probably more than once today, of what's happening, and that's causing us to change as well. So Mark Schaefer's quote here, we create content and content also creates us, I think is very true. And again, this is a big shift in many ways. Another big shift that we have to pay attention to when it comes to Gen Z is that Gen Z is not a demographic of passive consumers. They're not just sitting back and scrolling endlessly through any feeds except maybe TikTok. TikTok is such an outlier, but it's so massive with Gen Z. It's really hard to compare it to other platforms. But Gen Z is not a demographic that just passively wants to consume content in the same way that we have traditionally done. That means that reaching them traditionally is not an effective strategy. And so if you've just been, hey, we post something to Instagram, we post something to, Facebook or even Twitter/X or those kinds of things, doesn't mean they're going away, but you have to recognize that those are the places where Gen Z these days typically isn't. So organizations and brands that are currently successful are, here's that phrase again, reverse engineering their offerings for what communities want. For example, creating content specifically for the TikTok algorithm. So we're going back to that from the beginning of this webinar, how important the algorithm is. Showing up on TikTok and saying, hey, look, here's a cute little video. We have this teen program coming up, probably isn't going to be enough. And it hasn't been enough for a while. You're going to have to get down in the trenches and really get serious about content creation to be successful here. Building that community is going to be paramount. And that's something that we've heard about social media probably since its beginning, is that it's really about community. But we've had the ability in the past to kind of sidestep that purpose, which is really what social media was intended for, and just broadcast things out into the ether in the hope that somebody would listen. And we've moved past that model. In many ways, consistency is going to be extremely important here. If you're only posting things every so often, you aren't going to make it in this space. I always come back to TikTok because TikTok is really changing the way that Gen Z sees the world. And I told you before, I spend so much time on TikTok outside of work just to see what's going on there. And of course, there's great things that I pay attention to. I get a lot of my news these days from TikTok, as does Gen Z. You might not even realize that there are legitimate news sources and people who are acting as legitimate news sources and just reporting things. It's really very, very interesting, and it's becoming a primary news source. But what I'm trying to say is that if you're a professional content creator or an influencer or all these things that we've now been told we probably need to at least try to achieve, when you don't show up for a day on TikTok, people worry. You can start getting private messages all the time like, are you okay? So there's a big expectation there when it comes to creating content in places like TikTok. If you're not there daily or at least every few days, there's a concern. You can also very easily lose your audience, and the algorithm says, hey, people aren't engaging with you right now. We're not going to necessarily show your stuff to people because nobody is paying attention. So that means that we have to learn to play to the algorithm or to digital campfires. Not easy, in many cases, perhaps not even possible. And this isn't something that people want to hear, and I get that. This is not an easy or a comfortable situation for libraries. We've been able to do very easy social media work for the past probably 15 years, right? But we don't have the resources, including staff time or expertise, to do this kind of marketing consistently. In some ways, libraries are now effectively being priced out of the market, I would say. And it's not necessarily because of money. It's because of staff time and production resources, potentially. Being effective online means being a content creator in a real solid way. And that doesn't lend itself to how libraries operate or the resources that they have. Certainly, there are some libraries making it in this space, especially on TikTok, but you have to understand, these are the exception. The vast majority of us just effectively can't work with this kind of model. And make no mistake, it is a new model. This is not a trend. I have been saying for a while that we are essentially seeing the death of traditional social media in real time, which we are. So let's talk about where social media as a whole is right now. In this last section, let's take a little time to discuss whether or not social media is even still relevant. You're probably a little shell-shocked at this point with all of the previous information about how the fundamental model of social media either has changed or is changing. So we really need to take a hard look at whether or not this is something that we should even be doing anymore. And I think the answer to that is a very complicated one. So I'm going to do my best to try to sum this up. So the first question, of course, here is, does it still matter? Does social media matter for us anymore? And it still matters. So I can give you that right away. Yes. The answer to that question is yes, it still matters, but probably in a way that is significantly different than you have probably thought before, because the essential nature of social media marketing has changed forever. You might not have been aware of it, but it has been changing under your nose, and it's certainly becoming more apparent as time goes on. So we have to think differently about this. The power of social media is connection, and people aren't going to connect to you or your library if all you do is simply market to them. But you have to do something that catches their interest, that helps them with a need. At their point of need, and inform them. Usually, in many cases, you're going to also have to entertain them. And all of these are good starting points. But the most important thing I want to say here is that instead of viewing social media just as another form of marketing, you're probably going to have to reframe your entire thought process about this, and think about this as the first step in a marketing process. Libraries need to understand that social media is just now one cog in the wheel. It's not the entire wheel. And to be honest, it's always been that way, but most libraries haven't recognized that marketing is more of a funnel model where the goal is to create those deeper relationships. So if you think about it from a salesperson's perspective, is it more important to get the quick sale or to build a customer for life? And our goal is not to make the quick sale. It can't be in this new model. Jay Bauer, who is a marketing expert and has written many books on social media and marketing, has put forth this particular continuum, which I think is a very good point of our discussion today, because social media can play an important role in how libraries market themselves and move from this point where we're going to have a strong community. So he says that we see this emotional connection of social media is weak. It's ephemeral. Often you might feel like posting is throwing a message in a bottle into the ocean, hoping somebody will notice. For almost all libraries, we have been at the left end of this continuum where we have been focused very much to our detriment, I think, on the number of followers. Some of us have moved beyond that to how much engagement a post gets. But for many of us, we've been like, we're just trying to get more people. We want to increase our numbers. That's what we have to report to our administration or our board. That has never been a good way to measure effectiveness of social media. And Jay Bauer's continuum here really demonstrates that, is that we need to move away from that and at least start moving towards point number 2, content subscribers. So what's a content subscriber? Well, the most obvious example is that it's going to be someone who subscribes to a library newsletter, for example, a digital newsletter. And that's clearly one way. But these can also be people who subscribe to your content online and social media. So for example, with YouTube, you can follow someone and not subscribe to their content. In other words, like I do, I follow a large number of accounts on YouTube, but I only pop into YouTube every so often to see what's new. I actually, for almost none of those accounts, do I want notifications. I don't necessarily want for them to send me any kind of notice saying, hey, look, I have new stuff up. I don't care. So I'm not really a subscriber. I am still just a follower because I only see that stuff once in a while when I care to, and it's often by accident. It's not something I purposely say, hey, I want to have that. That's what a content subscriber is. So the goal is to at least start with this, is that you want to move away from followers to subscribers. You want people who opt in and say, I want your stuff. I want your content. That's where we need to be. Now, the final goal, according to Bauer, is, of course, to move over to the far right here, where you have a full community. And in fact, this is where you'll see success with digital campfires, because those are all about community. But we really want an audience. That's really what we want here, is we want not just people who consume our content, but people who want our content, and that's harder to get. An audience is a group of people who subscribe to your content. It could be blogs, it could be videos, podcasts, it could be any kind of opt-in channel. When you have an audience of subscribers, you've achieved an entirely new level of emotional connection, because your message is no longer just floating in what Jay Bauer referred to as the media ocean. You have reliable reach. It's somebody saying, it's okay to communicate with me. Tell me when you've got new things because I'm interested in it. And this is one of the main reasons that subscribers to a library's digital newsletter are much more powerful from a marketing perspective. That's not to say that social media shouldn't be something you do, because remember, it's just a cog, but the machine is bigger than that. I want you to remember that social media is not the most important point of a library's marketing. Even social media realm weren't in such disarray right now. This is a strategy that more libraries need to adopt. We need more than superficial consumers. We need to connect directly with people who want to connect. Unfortunately, this is where most companies and libraries tend to stop if they've gotten there at all, because they're falling short of that ultimate emotional connection that Bauer talks about, which is community, and that is much harder to get. So he gives a really good example here. He talks about if he announces a new book. If he puts out a message on social media announcing he has a new book, how many books is he going to sell? Almost none, because that's not community. Even with the large audience, people who subscribe to him, and he's been around for a long time, he still considers that to be the marketing ocean. But if he announces to his audience that he has a new book, how many will buy it? Probably lots, because every post and podcast, they're forming a tighter emotional bond with him. And this is the main reason I think that consistency is so critical in this new model. If you are not consistently building that connection, if you're just throwing those bottles out into the ocean, so to speak, every so often, you don't get that connection, which is critical for actually getting out your message. If you've been wondering why social media engagement, how many people like to post or even commented on a post, doesn't often translate to, say, increased program attendance, Bauer nails it here. It's not enough, and it hasn't been enough. If your library is only focusing on social media, it's not focused on building an audience, people who want your message. And it's not just about getting the message out anymore. You have to get people who want the message. So that means, of course, that passive isn't going to give you what you want. We as libraries have to recognize that social media isn't the end-all be-all. It's only the first step in a process. For most libraries, that means that the next logical step in building that process is some kind of opt-in channel, something where patrons need to choose to subscribe. And generally, that's going to mean some kind of email newsletter or a podcast or potentially a subscription to a blog, or again, YouTube. It could be just virtually anything where people can opt into that content. Some kind of content channel where your patrons are not just passive consumers or accidental content consumers. They have to want your stuff. That's so important. Keep in mind also that this kind of content channel can't be easily disrupted by, say, the failure of somebody else's platform. Twitter, we're looking at you. Because when Twitter essentially became this digital wasteland under Elon Musk, it was extremely disruptive. As I talked about earlier, Twitter's users have tried to jump to other ships that didn't appear to be sinking. And the problem with that, of course, is that there's no guarantee that those ships won't suddenly start having problems too. There's no social media channels that are truly immune to disappearing. We have to understand we have been building on a foundation of sand since the advent of social media, but that means that we have to really put our focus on ecosystems where we have a lot more control. The problem is that most of us are stuck on this view of social media, especially social media marketing, that emerged 15 years ago or so. And the world was a lot different then. You could attract attention simply by having an interesting social media account. It was a novelty, but not anymore. If the entirety of your social media strategy is posting content without a bigger overarching strategy that leads to that audience and leads to community, your library is going to need to wake up. It's time to smell the coffee. The world as it is now is not the world as it was. And so we as libraries have to be thinking very differently about our efforts in the social media space. So I want to thank you for listening to this today. If you are interested in contacting me, my address is there on the screen, as is my website, What Does This Mean to Me, Laura, which is the address is meanlaura.com. So thank you. I hopefully have given you some big things to think about today.